Hello, everyone, and welcome to Municipality, a podcast exploring the wonders of local government through discussions and special guests. It's Sam, and I have Natalia here with me today to talk about something we've been seeing and hearing a lot of in the past weeks and months: local protesting and organizing. Today, we'll be learning from several special guests who are local organizers, activists, and community leaders involved in recent protest movements. They'll be sharing how they got involved in organizing, what their experiences have been like, and what they recommend for getting involved in a protest or movement for the first time. After today's episode, you'll have everything you need to build your own protest. Today, we have three special guests with us. We'll let them introduce themselves, but please tell the audience your names, pronouns, and a bit of history you have with organizing. Let's start with Sophie.
Okay, hi, my name is Sophie. My pronouns are she, her. I'm in high school and I'm from San Diego, and this is my first time organizing something like this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on once again. Let's go to Brian next.
Hello, everybody. I'm really appreciative for this opportunity to be with you. So my name is Brian Benford, he, him, his. I've been a lifelong community activist since the 1960s, and I suspect I'll continue to be an activist till my 90s. But once again, thank you all.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for being with us as well. We really appreciate you coming on. And last, let's go with Aura.
Hey, I'm Cruz Heredia. I use she, her, and ella pronouns. I'm kind of getting new into this organizing thing, so I'm pretty excited to talk about what all that includes.
Awesome. And we're really excited to hear from you. For our first question, a pretty easy one. We're hoping you could all just share a bit about what motivated you to start organizing. And, let's follow that same order. Start with Sophie.
Okay, well, I think first of all, we kind of just wanted to feel like we were doing something. With everything happening in the news, we sort of felt like a little bit helpless, and so it was nice to feel like we actually had something to work on. And so then when we were deciding what we wanted to do, we were noticing that a lot of people were calling out like North County, San Diego, because we're living in a majority white, like higher income area, and so there was not a lot of protests in North County. And so we sort of wanted to bring a protest to this area in order to show allyship and to show that everybody's affected by this and we can't hide.
No, absolutely. I think that a lot of people are kind of feeling that same way right now. It's kind of this feeling of helplessness with everything going on. It almost seems like it's too big for any one person, and that's why I think it's important to get people organized. Brian, what about you? What motivated you to start organizing way back in the '60s?
Well, I should add right off the bat that I'm a candidate to be your next state senator for the 26th district. And back in the 1960s, I was born in the height of the civil rights movement. And I attended a school and church called St. Boniface that was led by a really progressive priest, Father James Brothy. So in the 60s, during the height of the civil rights movement, we were marching for better education, better housing opportunities, better jobs, a right to reach our full potentials. And what's really interesting in the most horrendous way is we're still fighting for all of those things up until today. And I'm deeply inspired by all the folks that are protesting and organizing. So it's been a continuum since the 60s. And I'm deeply inspired, and I have a great deal of hope because of all the amazing people out organizing today.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing those thoughts, and thank you so much for being a lifelong activist. There's a lot of injustice in the world, and it inspires people like me, to see that you've been organizing for so long and being an activist for so long. And you know what? Hopefully, we'll be able to see some of those changes soon. Auda, what about you?
So I think I forgot to mention that I'm with Sunrise DC. So I've just started organizing with them, but in my albeit shorter lifespan, I've known activism since I was very small. I was born in Puerto Rico, born and raised in Puerto Rico, and there's a lot that has happened there throughout my childhood years that has really influenced the way that I see life, influenced the way that I see change. And now was a time that I really, had the time to, and had the confidence to, and had the knowledge to be able to get involved and get my hands dirty with justice. As I tend to say a lot. So.
No, yeah, it's definitely hard work. I personally haven't done a whole lot of organizing, which is another reason why we wanted to do this episode, and I wanted to personally because there's so much even I don't know about organizing, and I'm hoping I can get those tools from you guys as well, just like our audience. So thank you guys very much for those responses. Yeah, I was thinking another question that we had was we were wondering what was it like preparing for the first movement or protest you were involved in or helped organize, and what are some emotions you remember feeling? Let's give the question to Aura first. She's been last every time.
So Sunrise Movement, which is an environmental justice movement, has been the first time that I've really been there to organize all the way through. But I'd probably attribute my first experience actually being to 2016 and the ensuing election and the DACA decision that was put out. At the time, I was an undergrad at UCLA, and you can imagine that the DACA decision or the decision to block DACA really impacted a lot of my friends, peers, coworkers, etc. And so back then we kind of really got to figuring out what do we do now with all of our friends who might be facing deportation in a couple of months, whose permission to be here will expire soon, etc. And that was the first time that I really got, I said, sorry school, sorry everything else, and kind of just really spent hours and hours trying to organize to figure out, how we could get them legal help, who they could talk to, what kind of information we could get our hands on, since at the time a lot was unknown. And I think all of those emotions of rage and fear, and also just trying to be there in a very loving and sympathetic and empathetic way, to my friends and to other students, that kind of has fueled a lot of what I've been trying to do for the past several years, since undergrad and in undergrad, etc., and how I really try to live my day to day. So there's a lot of anger and hurt that I think gets channeled into a good place, and hopefully an optimistic and productive place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always one of the things I think is best about protesting and organizing. It is a way to kind of let out all that anger that builds up after seeing injustice for so long. Sophie, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so this was the first protest that I was involved with organizing, which is a small community in Encinitas on the beach. And I remember that everything came together super last minute, and so I would say that the primary emotion that I was feeling was stress at the time. But I was working with a really great group of other high school students that I've worked on a lot of different projects with. So I think they could all be characterized as having, that slow burning anger. And we worked together on a lot of projects at our school, things like changing the curriculum or planning diversity conferences and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. And I totally relate to all the feelings that you guys have. I think I definitely relate to that fear and stress when I first went, because growing up, my parents didn't really allow me to go to a lot of organizing events, not because they didn't support the values, but they were more worried for my safety. I'm the oldest in my family, and my parents grew up in Colombia and Argentina, which obviously they have a different understanding of protest, in the sense that protest is a little bit less safe there. Not that it's super necessarily safe here, but they have a very different connotation with it. My mom grew up in the military dictatorship in Argentina, and so she remembers what that's like. And so I think I respect, obviously their perspective on it, but I totally get that feeling of that anger. But I always describe protest spaces not necessarily as an angry space, but people are so excited to finally have a place where their thoughts and the way that they feel, and they is the reality, and they're surrounded by that kind of those kinds of people. And so it is that anger, but it's also I don't know, I've always felt the most safe and happy at protest spaces, in the sense that I knew that if anything ever happened, or if I needed someone, they would be there for me, and we all have this common dream. So it's I don't know, protest spaces the first time is always such a memorable moment. But moving on from that, we're going to talk about kind of a little bit more of a current issue. So, what has been the biggest roadblock that you guys have faced kind of while organizing during COVID or just in general? Like, and what are the tools that you've kind of used to overcome these roadblocks? And I guess we'll start with Auda and start from, back again.
Sure. The biggest roadblock is probably honestly, besides like all of the stress that ensues from COVID and all of the fears related to that, a lot of it has been just trying to get people to show up to in-person actions. At Sunrise, we've been very mindful of people who are more strictly following social distancing and staying at home, etc. So it has been a little hard to like make sure that when we're planning actions, we can count on amounts of people who will be able to show up. But we've really been able to overcome a lot of that. So Sunrise DC, our hub, is fairly well internally organized, and we've been really kind of relying on a lot of internal leadership to get people out. So one thing that we've been doing is having neighborhood groups. So we've split up our neighborhood into like DC's zones or sections of DC who are able to go out as a group, and that way we can kind of like have accountability for members in the group who want to get out. So online organizing has also been super doable. Personally, Sunrise DC uses Slack, which is a like group workspace that a lot of groups use now because it's like a big way to communicate. But what it really has allowed us to do is to kind of come together. I think, like on this note, one thing to say is that I think that having a group that you're organizing with is really helpful. So like an already established group, in my case, that was Sunrise DC, because I agreed with its goals in general. But so that's not to say that individual organizing is not doable. It's just that like it actually is super useful to say, I have these skills, this is what I know how to do, and come into a group that has these other skills and they know what to do, and really contribute to that as a unit as opposed to just an individual. So yeah, hopefully I answered that.
Yeah, no, that was amazing, and I totally get that. Obviously, I've talked before on the podcast that I'm involved in GW Sunrise, which is, George Washington University's Sunrise chapter, and so I totally relate to that. We also use Slack, and like online organizing has become such like a big part of my life with Sunrise, because obviously now that school's out, even the people who live in DC, it's not like they can organize with GW, and so we were able to still push for divestment and actually achieve divestment by 2025 at GW, and they're pushing for for being carbon negative. So it's crazy the stuff that you can really achieve online. But anyways, moving past that, Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh gosh, thank you for the question. So I think about right now in the present, and I had mentioned before that I'm running the Wisconsin State Senator. And rather than a traditional campaign, I'm looking at this with the lens of a longtime community activist and family advocate and educator. And I'd like to think that our campaign is more of a movement than a traditional political campaign, that we were really committed to running a grassroots campaign or movement, which we all know, I'm preaching to the choir, that special interests and money has taken over government. So we wanted to model a way of diverse people from different backgrounds coming together in unity and love and coming together in respect to try to forge a new safe and socially just and equitable city of Madison and Wisconsin. So when I think about the challenges these days, that in my 60 years of living, I've been through many things and I've saw many things, but I don't think I've ever seen people of all backgrounds dive deeper in their self-reflection to look at what they can do to help forge this new world. So I often tell people that maybe we don't pay for the sins of our fathers or their fathers, but knowing the privilege that we gain in that, are we complacent in trying to make change, to make a more socially just community? So the biggest challenge is, while people are self-reflecting, and specifically white people, while they're self-reflecting more and looking if they're complacent at all or if they contribute to the status quo, the issue at hand is, will policymakers be willing to step aside and let new, diverse, informed voices have a shot at public policy? So in this really uncertain world with these two insidious diseases, COVID-19 and for centuries longer, systemic racism and oppression, just tearing apart our society and really causing us to think. Ultimately, that's the question in this divisive world that we live in now. Will people continue to come together and really dive deep and reflect on how they as individuals can make a positive change? And I'm trying to facilitate people from different backgrounds coming together to do just that. So no matter what time we live in, no matter the challenges, I often say to dive deep inside is one of the scariest things that we can do as human beings. And I would encourage more people to do so. And once again, I would like to help facilitate that process.
That's so true, and I feel like that's really important to do right now, especially because people have more free time a little bit, being that they're at home. So like, I don't know, that's so incredible. Anyways, I'll pass it on to Sophie.
Yeah, I think, like Aura was saying, one of the challenges of organizing during COVID was actually getting people to come out and protest. People were hesitant to do that with social distancing and stuff, and so I think attendance was affected by that, but there were other things that we were doing that we were encouraging people to do from home, like things like signing petitions or people that they could call, that kind of thing, where we need to go out and protest if they didn't feel comfortable with it. And then we've also been organizing, initiatives in our school, like I mentioned. And so one of the roadblocks with that was that the administration was not very willing to listen to minority voices and didn't really realize that there was a problem. And so I think one good thing that has come out of all of this is that it's sort of woken our campus up and people are starting to realize that there's a problem. And so now there's more space for voices like ours at our school. And so I think some things are going to start to change.
That's super, super exciting to hear. I mean, it's crazy how, the local impacts on the national, and then the national then impacts like these local communities that are more shut off. But moving on to the next question. This one is specifically for Auna. It's about, what resources and tools do you recommend for to people wanting to online organize? Because you talked about that, and what have you found most effective? Obviously, I know because of Sunrise, there's a lot of online organizing with social media and that kind of thing. So what kind of perspective, I want you to bring that kind of perspective and that experience.
Yeah, for sure. So like I said before, I think the number one thing for me has been having the infrastructure of an organization. So like I said, Sunrise was the one for me, or one of the ones for me. That does not mean that that's the one for everyone. But having a group with which you can organize, with whom you can like share skills and ideas and abilities, that's really, really productive. So in terms of being at home now, or maybe having some extra time, if maybe you don't have kids or something like that, and being able to get engaged, finding a group or two that is already organized is going to be like perhaps the easiest way that you can just kind of hit the ground running and get into something, and get to work. That being said, once you're already in there, there's a lot of things that you should probably, like toolkit wise, like have with you. So one thing is, yes, social media. Social media reach for Sunrise is amazing. It's just boomed since our last action last week on Sunday. It's just the easiest way to get people involved, get people aware of what you're doing, and to just really have a strong social media presence is a good way of kind of keeping up with the issues that you're keeping up with, the actions that you're having, and that kind of thing. And then in terms of like actually organizing, like I said, Slack is one way to do it. However, Slack, email, text messaging, all of that is not like security, privacy-wise, the safest way of organizing. So if you're organizing something that has sensitive information, if you want to keep your plans a little bit more on the DL, there's apps and resources for that. So some things that we use are, for example, a texting app that has more heavy encryption called Signal, that you might have heard of, because I know it's been kind of going around for a while, as well as like voice and video messaging apps like Jitsi. And the goal of these is just, to be able to be a little bit safer in the kind of information that you're sending back and forth. So this is the kind that you can use for personal use in your everyday if you want it to be a little bit more secretive than the FBI living in your camera or whatever. But in terms of being able to organize and just kind of not having your messages intercepted and being able to communicate about sensitive information, these kinds of apps do exist, and I would encourage people to shift over to using them. Honestly, it might just be like extra safety, but I would always encourage that over risking anything else. But yeah, I'll just say one more time, try to find an organization or two that either on your campus or in your community that you can kind of give yourself to in a way, if that exists. I know a lot of people live in parts of the country where that's not necessarily doable. You can't just join a hub. They don't necessarily just have one. Maybe like I live in a big city. I've always lived in big cities, so I have that benefit. In which case, then definitely individual organizing and using social media as a way to reach people in your community would be the way to go. I'm just saying, like, for those of us who have the benefit of being able to join organizations who have some internal infrastructure, I would say that's one of the ways that I've found to be the most productive with the limited skill set that I have, right? So that's what I would say.
No, absolutely. And, thank you very much for your perspective. I think that a lot of people don't think about, being able to organize online. And I think that people just see a protest and they just kind of assume that that's the way to go, and or maybe just like a Facebook group or a Facebook event or something is like the go-to. So thank you very much for those other resources. The next couple questions we have are actually just for Sophie. One thing that you said out that goes with this next question is, sometimes people don't have access to those kind of organizations. And, Sophie, we were actually wondering what it was like organizing on your own for the first time. And, did things like age or level of experience affect others' perspectives on what you were doing?
Yeah, I think we were all pretty inexperienced, and so a lot of what we were doing was just based off of because other people or what we were seeing other organizers do. And so something that we were seeing like a lot of these other protests doing was coordinating with the police, and we received advice that we should do that. We should talk to the police and talk to the city. And so we took their advice on that and we did that. But then I was thinking about it later, and I was like, why are we, working with the police if the whole point of this is protesting the police? And the point of that was to make sure that people are safe when they're there. But a big centerpiece of this is that people don't feel safe around the police. That's something that I kind of regret doing. And also, if the point of this is to practice civil disobedience, it's a little bit counterintuitive to tell the city this is exactly what we're doing, but we're only going to, do what you allow us to do. So I think that being new at this and not having a larger organization to help us out was we didn't really have the confidence to make our own decisions. Say, we don't want to do that. And then I think with age level and experience, we put that we were students on a lot of our flyers and on our social media, and stuff. I think it made it seem more trustworthy or with a grassroots movement, because we were seeing all these things like fake protests or unverified ones that were going around that people were saying we shouldn't go to, and so saying that it was student organized, student led. It made people more willing to go, and it attracted other people from our demographic, so other students that we knew. And then I think we were also able to receive more help from other local community organizers because, of our lack of experience. And so there were some really great protest organizers from Oceanside that came down and they helped us out and were working with us, and they came and spoke at the protest, and they were really, really helpful to us. So I think we were able to receive a lot of great advice and mentorship because of that level of experience. But one of the downsides, I think, was that we were having some difficulty with getting advertisement posted on other people's social media, because I think that they didn't really trust what we were doing, or that we, had it together enough for them to actively endorse us. And so it was a lot of phone calls and proving to people that we knew what we were doing. So I think we had to justify ourselves a little bit more, which took away.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that you had some community organizers coming out to help too, because I think it was Brian who said it before. We all need to help each other out. There needs to be all that love, and there needs to be that sense of community, and that that sense of, we should help out, other people who are just getting involved, because that's what it's really all about. It's about getting as many people involved as possible and trying to accomplish that change. But to move on, actually, Otto, we have another question for you. Um, we're wondering what made you choose to organize under a national movement like Sunrise instead of something more local?
So actually, Sunrise Movement is a national movement. However, the way that it's structured is that each city or hub or university has these smaller, more hyperlocal hubs. So when I joined Sunrise DC. However, there's like Sunrise, LA, there's Sunrise Philly, etc. So the goals of the movement are in many ways nationally focused, and I think DC plays an interesting role in that, which I'm happy to kind of get into in a second. But just to say, like, that the structure of the hub, in particular, like the people I work with, are people who are also based in DC or what we call the DMV area, which is DC, Maryland, and Virginia. When the pandemic hit and work from home started, I personally started having some more free time to kind of do things that I really cared about in addition to my job. And so Sunrise was a good place to start for me because I cared about environmental justice. That's just like a thing that I cared about. It seemed like a thing that I could join in. Sunrise movement itself is a youth movement, which means that all members are under 35. And that is super exciting when you have a lot of people who look like you, who believe in things you believe in, and who we can communicate with under similar terms. So in terms of why Sunrise, that's why Sunrise DC has an interesting spin on it, because DC is not a state yet, which means that we don't have any federal level representatives, right? We don't have any senators, we don't have any House representatives, we don't have any Congress people, etc. And so our politics is actually quite hyper local. What DC has is a council made up of 8 representatives, 1 for each smaller district of DC, which is how DC is split up, and then 3 at-large members, which represent the entirety of DC. So it's them and the mayor who basically make all of the decisions that DC residents are concerned with directly in the local sense. So a lot of the actions that we've been planning lately have been targeted at these council members, at these local representatives who decide, who vote on, for example, the Metropolitan Police Department's budget, so DC's police budget. They vote on education. They vote on all these things that maybe at actual states that have actual state representation, go about it a little bit differently. So a lot of our actions have been hyper-local. However, because DC is DC and is the nation's capital, it also has direct in-person, pre-COVID, in-person direct access to a lot of these state representatives and to a lot of nationally elected federal reps and elected officials. So historically, DC Hub has also been a part of their state's demands, has been there to amplify and echo and in-person support other Sunrisers across the country who come to the Capitol to protest. So a couple of years ago, there was a sit-in at Nancy Pelosi's office. There's, Sunrise DC has helped elect, AOC has helped elect Jamal Bowman, had just got a neck and neck in the Booker election in Kentucky. So Sunrise DC is actually quite involved in not just DC things. But as a hub, it's also very concerned with these hyper-local issues that affect DC and DC residents.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear, the differences in Sunrise hubs, and obviously, a lot of what I do with Sunrise is very local, but, it's cool to be able to be part of an org that does a lot of local stuff, but also does national, so you don't really have to sacrifice either or. Obviously, I'm very biased towards Sunrise because I love it so much, so...
Yeah, no, it also makes you super aware of issues concerning places beyond just where you live, right? So being concerned with elections elsewhere, being concerned with issues affecting different states, different cities, that's something that, not a lot, you don't necessarily get if you don't have this national movement, this national infrastructure. You might be concerned only with what's going on in your state or your city, which is completely fair and completely valid. It's just that, and maybe this is just a part of being in DC, right? DW is also in DC. maybe it's just a part of that, but it's this ability to also be informed about what's happening in the rest of the country. That's actually pretty exciting when you're in it.
100% agree. I feel like when you live in DC, it's impossible to ignore everything else. But even still, I feel like other Sunrise hubs still have that connection. But it's a very Sunrise offers that very unique perspective in organizing. But moving beyond that, this is a question for everyone, and we're going to start with Brian. But the question is, what advice do you have for new organizers about maintaining a positive public image and maintaining press coverage? And obviously, like, we've seen a lot of this during like Black Lives Matter and like how the press has changed their perceptions or their perceptions of whether something's violent or not or justified or not. And so kind of how do you manage that, and what's your experience with that? So
thank you. And I just want to say, I know that I'm a total stranger to all of us here, but Audra and Sophie, I'm deeply inspired that I told you all that, I'm older than dirt. 60 years old, and that my generation, we saw all the best things from the civil rights movement, all the best practices to fight the Vietnam War, women's liberation, environmental justice. But we dropped the ball. People my age and older dropped the ball. So your generation is out there fighting for things that we should have took care of. During the 80s, we became complacent, and a lot of us, while I'm very proud of my social work and my community work directly, we should have taken care of this. So I'm deeply inspired by you all. So to answer the question, we talked about this anger, this slow burning anger. And oftentimes that's hard to keep checked because we're out doing this because it's in our heart, it's in our soul, it's in our total being that other people should have that right to reach their full potential, that systemic racism and oppression should not be a thing. It should be totally eliminated. So, the balance, that pure visceral anger with effectiveness. So me being a 60-year-old Black man, living in a white community, if I'm screaming, if I'm pounding, if I'm emulating Malcolm X, I run the risk of scaring people away. Because while more white people are diving deeper and self-reflecting, I had said it before that this is the time that we need to come together and respect and unity and love. And that's often hard. I get it. I carry the yoke of racism around my neck for all of my life. So it's kind of hard to play nice when the world isn't playing nice to you. But to be effective, we all know viscerally as humans that when we come together about that hate, about that conflict, we're more effective, that we can find the commonalities, we can find the common denominators that bind us rather than the external things like skin color or who we pray to or who we decide to love that separates us. So it is a fine balancing act, but I think that as a good organizer, you really have to reflect inwards. And I heard a quote, and maybe it's urban myth, but it's attributed to JFK, in that if you have real progressive liberal views, you should dress conservatively. So I'm not down with wearing a suit and tie, but I am cognizant that once again, I want people to be comfortable where they can hear the message, but there's times where people should not be comfortable, where they'll seek to understand also. So I wish I had the perfect answer, but that's what I would say is look at your own biases and continue to self-reflect as an organizer and be cognizant how your words and actions might impact others.
I mean, what you said is very true that, we have to worry about perceptions, but, it's important for people to be uncomfortable. And that's, I think, something that people are really starting to lean into right now. And I think that it's kind of a balancing act. I agree. It's hard. It's so hard to feel like you have to compromise your message to make people feel comfortable, but there's some points where something has to give. So I totally get what you're saying. And I want to pass it on to Auda.
Yeah. So also thank you, Brian. That's really encouraging to hear from you. So right back at you with the empowering. So in terms of so this is a little interesting because I'm not an individual, and I am part of a movement and organization. So there is an extent to which you feel this responsibility to represent the org. However, Sunrise DC is extremely out there and unapologetically loud about the message that it's trying to send. And you can see that pretty clearly on our Twitter, Sunrise Movement DC, where we kind of go off on a lot of elected officials' Twitter with a lot of, I feel sometimes it's unfair because there's like a bunch of young people tweeting at you and you're like a 50-year-old elected representative, and so maybe you don't know how to clap back. But there's a lot of clapping back Sunrise does. That's pretty dope. So I would recommend y'all to check that out because I personally think it's hilarious. But that being said, I think that there is, we have been, for many years, Black, Indigenous, and people of color and working class folk, queer folk have had to, as I said, compromise their message in order to make typically white folk feel comfortable. I personally don't really agree with that perspective of being in a very sense of like there has to be a give and take to some extent, especially when you're trying to advocate for specific causes. Just as an individual, it's hard to like give up. Like you want spaces in which you don't have to give those things up, right? In which you don't have to deal and manage and respect people's like fragility in those senses. That being said, I think for maintaining an image that's actually productive and actually goes far and has actually heard, what Sunrise DC has done as a majority white hub is focus all of its efforts in amplifying the voices of Black leaders and Black organizers in the DC community. So who actually in DC are majority Black women. So this is kind of an interesting place to be at when you are part of a majority white hub, in how you don't want to make the story about you, right? The story isn't about us. Abolitionist causes, defunding police departments, that is not what Sunrise is known for. Sunrise is known for the Green New Deal. It's known for fighting environmental causes. And so there's an interesting place in which we have to balance wanting to amplify and echo these voices and these calls for, whether it be defunding the police, whether it be DC in particular, not building a new jail, and other things like that, is to know that, we are not at the forefront. We have not previously historically been at the forefront of this fight as Sunrise Movement. And we need to amplify the voices of those who have, and we need to do so in a way that does not deter from their objectives and take away from what they've actually already been doing, right? We cannot come into this place and be like, yeah, Sunrise is going to help, and then make matters worse, right? We have to be aware and be careful with how we're doing these things. So I think Sunrise has done a pretty good job of training its action leads on these kinds of things. So at Actions, we always have a designated press person. We always have a designated police liaison or a press liaison, and so that way, when any press coverage or any police try to intervene, they know who to get directed to, and that person is trained or informed or more responsible over what kinds of things Sunrise wants to stand as. So I would say for organizers who are doing in-person actions, having this kind of information available to a person or two who can represent your organization, that's probably a really good way to go. And Sunrise DC in particular has taken upon itself, or Sunrise National actually, a bunch of clubs have taken it upon themselves to create teach-ins or to create kind of educated workshops in which this kind of information does get shared so that everyone can kind of, but like I said earlier, how do you build your toolkit so that you can organize effectively, productively, and safely? That's one of the ways to get educated and informed on these kinds of things so that you're not out there and not sure what to say or sure what to do or not sure how to manage the situation. And that all comes from doing and be failing at times and succeeding at others. So I'm very grateful that the organization that I'm a part of kind of has some of these things figured out in ways that I as an individual have not before.
Yeah, and it's great that you're sharing those resources here. So regardless if you're part of Sunrise, you can take away from the mistakes and the learning that other, organizers have had. And so that's super important. And I really like your point about saying that, at some point, people need to be loud and proud about their message, and you sometimes have to commit to it. And that is also an aspect that I've always really found appreciative of Sunrise, and that they always will try to elevate voices of leaders and movements and try to make space, and are actively trying to do that, because this isn't specifically Sunrise's fight, but for environmental, justice to deal with, have the Green New Deal, and to deal with the climate crisis, you have to deal with systemic racism because they are so interconnected. But to move on to Sophie, can take the floor.
Yeah, I think just being new organizers ourselves, not part of a larger organization, we haven't really had to deal with press coverage, so I'm not sure how much advice I have to give on this one. I think there was like one reporter at a protest and I got an article of the Tribune. Yay. But I think being students helped us out with that because it's kind of harder to criticize students, so we really have to deal with like make sure like the press coverage is positive. The only other thing I would say is that recently I've started to see more like the power of social media, where people are taking the power back into their own hands to be their own media and to fill in the gaps that the actual media has failed to cover. And so
can I echo Sophie's last point there? I think that one thing that's really great is to have your own people out there with cameras recording and making sure that you can kind of put your own, like, here's what actually happened, here's a completely unedited clip, here you go, into the world through social media, because it's a really good way of just documenting the facts. And sometimes that's like good press coverage for the people who you're like protesting against, right? Sometimes like a council member in our case says something good, and you kind of sometimes are like, oh, do I want them to say something good if I want to antagonize them? But I think what's important is not antagonizing them necessarily. It's just being able to say, like, look, this is what they're committing themselves to. If this person said that they're committed to defunding the police, and they said they're committed to defunding the police, and that's great, that's a win for us. And now we have to hold them accountable. And I think that, like, being your own press in some ways is a really good way of getting your voice out, of getting your reach out, and making sure that you're showing that you're standing up in the ways that you're saying you're standing up, and showing up in the ways that you're saying you're showing up.
Thank you so much for those experiences, Sophie and Nada. I really appreciate getting two perspectives on that, especially Sophie, with you being younger than ourselves and our other guests. I think it's more encouraging for people who are younger, hearing your perspective, especially on using social media, because that's kind of what our generation is becoming used to now. That's what kind of has become part of our daily lives. I mean, I tell you, I'm on Twitter probably 5-6 times a day, which is probably lower than other people too. But I want to move on to the next question because we've had questions for our other guests. I have some questions for you now, Brian. One of the questions is, what has been the biggest change in public protest in your time as an organizer and activist?
Well, I think Audra and Sophie and you all really illustrated social media. I could show you, I still have an 8-track at home, so I'm a technology dinosaur. And I have an amazing campaign team, just the most brilliant young social activists that I've ever met. And they get this, or I don't. So I often think, with the horrendous murder of George Floyd, Mr. Floyd, that was captured on camera. Now, please imagine, try to think what your parents, they're probably my age, what that would have looked like in the 60s and 70s. There was no cameras that could readily have done that we carry in our pockets. So that's really powerful technology. I have a deep appreciation for it, and as a longtime activist and organizer, I'm just so amazed what folks can do with technology these days. But what it really does come down to, and I think we all touched on it, is cultivating those real, intentional, interpersonal relationships with people, that we're carrying this slow burning anger in our gut, and we know there's other people out there that feel the same way. And listening to the stories and creating pathways to ownership where movement isn't from the top down, that it really is from the ground up. I just want to share really quick. Years ago, I was one of the founding members and the first coordinator of the Grassroots Leadership College. So that was put on in the city of Madison by the 4 planning councils. And the premise was to take emerging leaders and team them with seasoned leaders, and then have them go back in their communities to do the good deeds to affect the positive change. So as I look for the future and look right now that with technology and social media, how much more effective we would have been if we would have had access to that. So I really commend you all for using those tools. Sam, I hope I got to your question. I think I'm missing part of it.
Oh no, that's actually I think that's a very good answer. I know we've touched on technology throughout, and obviously that's because in this day and age with this pandemic, that is a pretty prevalent it's prevalent in everyone's lives because this is how we're passing time, trying to keep face-to-face interactions to a minimum. So yeah, thank you. I think it was a great answer. And I have another question for you. You had mentioned several times now you're running for Wisconsin State Senate in the 26th district. How did your experience as an activist influence your future career paths and your running for or your decision to run for public offices?
Thank you so much for that question. So, for the last 30 years, I have served as a family advocate, an educator, a community activist. I'm a former alderperson for the city of Madison, and I'm also the past president of the Equal Opportunities Commission. So, for those 3 decades, I've carried thousands of people in my heart that are most marginalized and vulnerable in our communities that I've sat across from and try to partner to help them reach their full potential. So carrying that in my heart really caused me to have this epiphany that once again, while I'm proud of my individual service to children, to families, to their parents, to communities, much more needed to be done. It's like that old adage about all the fish washed up on the beach and somebody's throwing one in at a time and people are like, are you making a difference? Well, I felt like I was making a difference to that one individual, that one family. But I was called to do much more. I recently finished my master's degree in social work last May. And as a social worker, not a career politician, my ethics, my professional ethics mandate that I do try to help the most vulnerable in the community. So all these years of this slow burning anger, and like I said before, these issues haven't changed since the 60s. All the beautiful, diverse, passionate young adults and young people out in the streets fighting for change is the same thing that we were fighting for back in the 60s. So I'm deeply inspired by all of the actions that are taken. But long after people have to leave the streets, we need to continue that fight. So I had shared with you my real candid disclosure that I believe my generation failed. So this is my chance for redemption. I don't care about political stock. I'm way too old for that. But what I do care about is the thousands of people that I've served over the last 30 years. And so it's not about me as a person, as a candidate. It's about this movement. It's about this message. And that was learned from my early years of activism. And once again, being with you all, I am deeply inspired. We're from different backgrounds, and like I said, I'm older than dirt, but you all really give me such energy and hope and inspiration. So I think that's what led me to run for this office. I don't think, I know that's what led me to run for this office. Thank you for that question.
I mean, it's so nice to hear such kind words about all of us and like the hard work that we do, and it's very nice to feel recognized, especially because I feel like specifically in my experience, it's mostly young people with other young people, and so I don't often get to have, I guess, people from the generation above me and and so on, like be excited about the stuff that we're doing, and so it just really warms my heart. But for the next question, this one's for everyone, and I'll start with Sophie, but what's the ultimate goal that you want to reach with your activism? Because I feel like it's so important if you're going to be, spending so much time doing something, there has to be a goal, even if it's, the ideal situation, there always should be something that we're striving for and something that we're trying to improve. So Sophie, what is that for you?
I think with doing work in my school, I would say a good way to summarize my goal would be, firstly, to make minority students feel more comfortable, to have better experiences at our school, and then also to have the white students have to deal with their whiteness and become more educated on race and be able to talk about it. And so, I think with the protest, most of our attendance was within our school, and so I'm Asian. The other organizers, none of them were Black, and so I think what we wanted to do is we wanted to show support for the Black students and faculty, and wanted to show them that we cared. And I think we also wanted to spread a message to the administrators at our school effective. We got a meeting with the head of school about a week after the protest where we were able to talk about things that we wanted to see changed in the school. So I think we're going to continue working on things like affinity groups, recruiting and retaining more faculty of color, changing the curriculum, changing discipline procedures, and all that kind of stuff. So
that's amazing that you have such strong sense of goals and such a strong sense of self. It's amazing to see such young people, even though I'm probably not that much older than you, do this kind of amazing work. And then we can move on to Auda.
Sure. So I think the ultimate goal for me as an individual would be to make sure that this is really just always my priority. So in terms of personal fulfillment, I think there's this holding myself accountable to my values, to more inclusive values, to more progressive values, and making sure that I never get too tired. And that's hard, not getting tired. But that is the ultimate goal, to be able to not burn out. In terms of what I actually hope it does, and what I actually hope that Sunrise can do, and what I actually hope that anyone can do, is to always be making sure that you're being productive, not just in terms of policy, but that we're shaping and shifting the status quo, and we're redefining what that means. And so obviously it's hard to hear, right, from Brian, that we're fighting for the same things that have been fought for many, many, many generations, and for many years. And that's always a bummer, right? It's okay, well, when do we get there? When do we get to the point where we don't have to fight for this anymore? But it's also really exciting, because I think there has been progress, and I think it has been measurable, and I think it can be observed, and I think that we're still dealing with a lot of the base root issues and the foundational issues. But I think that the conversation keeps getting progressing and progressing more, and so it's getting further and further away from just oh wow, we're really at zero progress with this issue of systemic racism. For one, we're calling it systemic racism now, right? Which is not necessarily what it used to be called. So I think just in general, it's going forward, making sure that everything gets just shifted more and more progressively, more and more aware, more and more towards equity, which is just really the number one thing for me. I believe it's just really just reaching equity in everything that we do, such that our future is not, the present that we're living towards, future in which everything is equal, is just really keeping in mind equity at every step of the way, and really making sure that we take into account what the disparate experiences and the disparate systems that are governing people's lives are. And that's truly what I believe is true for me as a person, and it's true for Sunrise, and it's true for so many movements that want to see a just and equitable future for everyone.
I mean, that's really incredible to hear. I mean, it's so nice to feel that clear sense of goal, but also that you seem so passionate about it, and that you're very aware of the possibility of burnout. I feel that's something that isn't super talked about in activism spaces. I think about my personal experience with divestment. Yesterday I was actually on a call with the previous members who were students of GW and are now alum, and the divestment fight started 8 years ago. I joined the last 6 months, and it was the craziest, most insane experience ever. And I think I've had several months off now, because we won divestment at the end of July or June, and we've started having a little bit more time off in summer. I can't imagine doing that for 4 years straight with nothing in sight. And so it's so important to make sure that we take care of each other and give each other space when we need to take a step back, but also always having that plan to come back, and having that sense of values and being so strongly tied to that is so important. And I really appreciate you raising that point. But now going on to Brian to close out this question.
Thanks again for inviting me today. And you all are really amazing. And what I say is that your generation is leaps and bounds more brilliant than we could ever have hoped that. And you're right, a lot of these fights take years. When we were talking about divesting, in my heart, I remember the days where we were pushing the UW-Madison back in the 80s to divest from South Africa funds there. So, some of these fights have been going on forever. But not to be this eternal optimistic, but there is change, and it's coming. And change is one of the hardest things that us human beings navigate. No matter where you are on the life spectrum, change is hard. But with these things that we're demanding these days, these profound changes, and once again pushing people to dive deep, that it's my sincere goal of it's not going to happen overnight, I recognize that, but in my lifetime, and not to sound morbid, you all, you're going to be around a lot longer than me. So the goal is to see brilliant, young, diverse leaders like you all coming together. So when we went August 11th, we're committed to keeping our office at the state capitol open as a learning lab for young activists and young community leaders that they can team up with more seasoned leaders and develop the chops and the skills and the experiences that they need to go back and impact change. So that's my sincere goal, is that we can keep talking to each other, that we haven't gotten to the point where we're so divided and so full of hate as a world, as a nation, as a state, that we stop trying to seek those commonalities within each other. So that's my sincere goal, that we keep talking and we keep trying to forge a greater understanding with complete cultural humility and love, and recognize our rights to reach our full potential. And I'm praying in your lifetime that we'll address all of these issues.
Really quick, just because I noticed something, I wanted to interject for a sec. Brian, I think with every answer you've given, you've thanked us young folks, and you've told us we're brilliant and how much you appreciate us. So I just wanted to really quick say how much we appreciate you and the work that you've done in the past, because like you said, these movements take years and years to actually come to fruition and actually achieve something. But the fact of the matter is, they have to start somewhere, and they started with your generation and with the protests in the 60s and 70s. So I just want to say thank you so much for the work that you've done in your life, and for setting the precedent for what we do now.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And I was also going to add, I finally realized what I was going to say that I really resonated with, it, like the right to reach your full potential. The way that you said that, I don't think I've ever heard someone say that. Maybe I've just like missed it, or if it's not quite resonated in the same way. But I think that's like such a powerful thing to say, because it's like we all have dreams, we all want to achieve, whatever that is, and giving everyone the same, right to reach that. It's like a way to kind of describe equity in a way that I think, really clicks for people. So I that was the word that I was trying to think of earlier. But thank you so much for all of you, sharing your goals, and obviously, and now kind of wanting us to look back, which could be, a little bit or a very long time on, your experiences, and like looking back and how you got to where you are today. What would be a piece of advice that you'd want to give to someone who wants to start participating and start becoming an activist or leading a protest or a movement? Because obviously I think it's a very scary place to start. And so what's a piece of advice that you would have given and wish you would have known when you started? And we can start with Sophie.
Okay, yeah. First of all, I just wanted to add, I also want to say thank you to Brian. And you talk about the slow burning anger, and I think it's incredible that you've been able to keep it for 60 years, and you and Alvaro, you both seem like such incredible and influential people. So thank you for everything you do. And so yeah, like looking back on my experiences, I would say with the protest, I would say just do it. I felt so underqualified and nervous with doing it, but we just did it and we learned from it. And now if we wanted to do something else, we have experience, we have knowledge, and we're able to be more confident with doing it. And I would definitely say that we're probably more capable than you think you are. And also there were some lessons that I learned from planning the protest that I wanted to share. We talked with the organizer from Oceanside that helped us out afterwards, and he gave us some advice. First of all, he said to use our privilege. So our protest was, the attendance was probably majority white people. And so since we were coordinating with the police, they were telling us that we had to stay on the sidewalks for the march part of our protest. But there were parts of it where people kind of spilled out into the streets a little bit, and the cars just ended up going around us, And so he was talking to us afterwards, and he was saying that because of who we are and the privilege that we have, if we had disobeyed them and just gone into the streets, then they would have protected us. They would have just blocked out the street. They wouldn't have done anything. And so it was a good lesson to learn that we have more privilege, and so we are able to strategically break more rules without being punished for it than, maybe Black people would be able to. And then the other thing we learned was that he said make people uncomfortable, because for like the second portion of our protest, we had speakers come up and we did it in this sort of like secluded and quiet area of the beach, but it would have been more effective if we had done it in like a busier area, like near where all the stores were like people walking by, because then people would be forced to listen whether they wanted to or not, and then they would be forced to, reckon with their identity and everything that was going on, whether they agreed with us or not. So those are some things I learned. And then just in general with like activism, being a student and everything, one of the things that I wish that I had knew was like putting more emphasis on self-care, because, a lot of this stuff is very difficult and it's very stressful and you just keep going and going and going. And so I think something that I wish I had prioritized more was just like taking care of myself and knowing when to step back. And it's like, you don't have to do everything, you don't have to be like a spokesperson. Just if you need to, take a step back and just deal with yourself for a little while, that's, perfectly valid and perfectly fine.
That is some very, very incredible advice, like very wise, and like I really resonate with a lot of the stuff you say, and like I think that it's so incredible. It makes me very excited that like the people that are, behind us are still, have that flame, but also have so much that I never knew at that age, and I wish I would have known. And so it's so amazing to hear that kind of stuff. And so now moving on to Auda, do you have any other pieces of advice?
Yeah, so super echo Sophie on all of those things. And especially, yes, with burnout and self-care, that's really important. But the first point, I'll just do it, that is, I think that there's a lot of fear that can be overcome once you just take that first initial step. And like I've said throughout this whole thing, having an organization to back you up on those goals is a really good way of doing that. So that's a piece of advice I'll give anyone is, if there's a group you can join them. If you can't join a group, make one. There's a lot of power in the numbers and the numbers of people who are showing up and the numbers of people who you have around you to support you in taking these active roles. And so, if you want to have self-care and you want to take a day off and you want to sit back, you have to have people who are willing to take over for you. And that's like a really powerful thing about movements, about, horizontally structured movements, about sharing responsibilities, and about trusting other people who are around you to be able to deliver the same kind of energy and excitement and great anger that you feel. And so really having that network around you is going to be one of the biggest things that supports you and propels you to keep doing more and to be able to keep going. So that's something I would do. The other thing I would say is honestly probably just be proud in the little things, proud in the little wins. Be excited about the way that your action went. Doesn't matter if 10 people show up, doesn't matter if 20 people show up, if 100 people show up. It should all be exciting. That you're voicing your voice, that you're amplifying the voices of those who need to be amplified. You're using your privilege to do that. You're using your own experiences to do that. You're resonating with people. You're encouraging other people to take a stand. And I think that, just doing the thing and then just kind of being happy for just the fact that you did it in some ways, that's like the first step to just kind of taking lead and starting to start out your career as an activist or start out your career as a leader. And I think that you should never doubt that. You should never be like, oh man, like we didn't do a great job. Like you're always doing something and you're always doing a good job.
And I would even say that like sometimes you learn from the things that don't work out. There are things that don't really work out, but then you learn from them so much. And it's just that even putting yourself out there is going to change, and you don't know how that's going to impact someone else watching. You don't know if you're going to be that your event that has 10 people, that one person, that was their first event, and that kickstarts their activism. And so it doesn't matter how small it is, like truly it's to the individual level, and that's how you create change. And so that's so important, because it doesn't always have to be a massive, massive success. And, success can kind of change, because maybe when you start something is successful, that maybe wouldn't be the same today. But the thing is, regardless, they are still successful, whether it's small or big. And, it's just important to keep pushing. And so to close us out, Ryan, will you please give us, the last piece of advice?
Well, you all really touched on some really amazing and very wise insights. And what I would say is, not to sound cheesy or corny, but really know why you're doing it. I often said that, I'm non-traditional in my spiritual beliefs, but going out to the desert and self-reflect and really looking at my own limitations as a human being and my capacity to love and that burning anger once again. And what's really critical is it should not be about any of us. I've heard this old saying that it's akin to being a shepherd where you're leading the sheep from behind, and all the time they don't know that they're being led. And I think that's what's really important, that a lot of good organizers understand that it's not about us as individuals so much, and to build that capacity so when we do need self-care, when we do need to put our head under a pillow and cry, there's other people that keep going and other people that feel ownership in it. It should never be, that's been one of the mistakes of the civil rights movement, is that they assign certain leaders that could never possibly capture the voice of every person of color. So just to be cognizant of our limitations and to pull in as many people as we can around us, and to find that pure joy despite the burning anger in each new person coming and each new person having the doors open to public policy and once again their rights to reach their full potential. I think many people miss that, and we take too much on our shoulders because we care, we're loving, we have empathy, but we also have to recognize it's not about us, it's about the message. And once that happens, then it's liberating. It really is. Whatever people say to you or whatever's dumped on you, it's not about you. It's about something that can never be challenged or argued, and that's a true, pure message. So that's all I would like to add.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. Now that's kind of all the questions we have. And so after hearing all the goals of our guests today, we hope that, you guys out there are inspired to be involved with a protest or a movement that you believe in, just like our guests. And we're trying to show that, it's not as difficult as it may seem, and that, we all can achieve what we want to achieve if we work together. So again, many thanks to Sophie, Brian, and Aura from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and advice with us. We're so truly grateful to have each and every one of you on today's episode, and we want to formally welcome you to our municipality. And so for more information about protesting and organizing at the local level, please feel free to reach out to us on Facebook at Municipality Podcast, or on Instagram or Twitter at Municipality with 2 underscores. And for next week, we can look forward to learning more about local government in our series called Local Government 101 Part 2 with Matthew and Adrian. And so, again, we want to thank all of you for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon in our municipality.